Okay, a walk through deep time. A story of the Bristlecones. This is not a history lesson. It's an exploration of lore and spirituality centered in a cluster of trees in a string of mountains in Eastern California. Like all good lore, much of it came to me as oral history, so forgive what I've misremembered. Well, last summer, I had the good fortune to land a job nobody wanted. I signed up to work in a gift shop at the end of a 50-mile commute and a 6,000-foot climb. Solomon Grove, home of the oldest verified non-clonal living tree on the planet. Truly a vortex. I found my job wasn't so much about running a cash register. It was about ushering people into a holy place, priming them for a spiritual experience. Have you ever had an experience of nature that took your breath away? I've had many. The otherworldliness of a forest glade, the aha moment when the dawn pinks the Rocky Mountains, the sense of being a speck looking up on a clear, starry night. But the first time I walked among the bristlecones, I was hooked. An intro sketch of bristlecone trees. Inyo National Forest had a bunch of trees above 9,000 feet altitude, some that looked beat up and mostly dead. Trees being trees and humans being humans. Someone, a ranger perhaps, cut one down, had it milled into boards and used them to build his kitchen cabinets. Looking at the wood every day, that ranger noticed how close the grain was, how that added up to a lot of years in tree ring count. He thought someone should look into it. He talked it up with everyone he met. Enter Andrew Douglas, an astronomer who took an interest in tree rings and their patterns to prove his pet theory about climate and solar flares. His protege, Edmund Schulman, had been running around the Southwest coring giant trees like the sequoias to study the tree rings, finding they could reach 3,000 years old. Drawn by the rumors of old age, he even checked out the biggest, fattest bristlecone tree and was miffed that it was a mere 1,000 years and change. But he finally recognized size doesn't matter. Those damaged looking sick figures at the very edge of survival might have a story to tell. And he found a tree, a living tree, estimated to be around 4,850 years old. Look at these two trees, for example. Jabba the Hutt there on the left, thousands of years old. And the sapling on the right, already hundreds of years. The ancient bristlecone forest of the White Mountains became a hive of scientific activity, starting in the 1950s. Tree rings are wider in good years, narrower in bad years, forming a pattern identifying the period they lived through, like fingerprints identify a single human. Dendrochronologists found that tree ring patterns overlapped and they could trace that forest through time, from living trees to dead snags to fragments laying on the ground, an unbroken record back 8,000 years. And with a few gaps back to the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago. Based on the preciseness of tree ring patterns, archaeologists found that some Native American ruins were 1,000 years older than they'd thought. Scientists were able to do a major correction on carbon dating. Europeans borrowed the tree ring techniques using oak trees preserved in bogs, I believe, to rethink even the age of Stonehenge. You see, Bristlecones have evolved for toughness and longevity. They are 5-needle pines, and those needles look roughly triangular if viewed from the tip. In wind and snow, they come together into a cylinder, a 5-sliced pie for greater protection. While most pines hold their needles for 3 to 5 years, bristlecones save their energy by only dropping a needle every 35 to 40 years. They only grow in cool climates and a select altitude, 9,000 to 11,000 feet, where most threatening insects can't survive. They don't like competition from grasses, underbrush, or even other trees. This natural spacing and lack of underbrush protects them from forest fires, as does the lack of needle fall that might feed a smolder. Even a lightning hit only burns the one tree. Sectored architecture is another survival skill. Bristlecone roots spread wide to pick up moisture from rain and snow before it evaporates or sinks out of reach. Often growing on slopes, the biggest threat to old bristlecones is erosion. Rule of thumb is about a foot of soil loss every 1,000 years. Here you can see the bulging out in the gray color of the bottom 2 feet of this tree, what used to be underground 2,000 years ago. Now, see that ribbon of bark? It starts on the right and then crosses over on that branch across your screen. As the downhill side erodes and the roots there can no longer draw anything in, that sector dies off, root to tip. The bark sloughs off that sector of trunk and the needles die. Yet bristlecones can seal it off so it doesn't introduce decay to the rest of the tree. And even the dead sections don't rot, they just polish like sculpted marble. Oops. Go back. Innate slowness shows up in reproduction too. I love the cute little purple pine cones. It takes 2 years, not one, for a cone to form, be fertilized, grow a seed inside, and then release it. Yet botanists have sprouted new trees from seeds collected from that oldest living tree. Yes, there are baby bristlecones. Where I worked, a combination of great conditions had resulted in a crop of 450 babies in 2015. That was right by the visitor center. And 6 years later, 2/3 had succumbed to drought, but in a space that could only support a few mature trees, that was a good start. And here you see a far view and you can see the little tiny trees, the younger trees kind of creeping up in the cool heights just short of tree line. Well, I fell head over heels in love with these trees. Tough creatures that had outlived civilization, yet vulnerable to man, not just the lumberjacks of a century ago. The first year they put a sign in front of the oldest tree and built a path up to it, pieces of it started disappearing. After 4,800 years, let's chip it to death for souvenirs. Now the exact identity is kept quiet. Both visitors and workers like me don't need to know. It's enough that I know the general area. This photo is of that area. Among a cluster of about 16 trees over 4,000 years old. Does that tree need me to identify it, take a picture, brag about my special knowledge? Of course not. I've walked among the ancients through this very grove. It echoes time, this very moment and eternity. The latest threat to the grove is night photographers of all things. It's become cool to take long exposure photos of a certain tree. In their eagerness to get the trophy shot, visitors have been stepping off the path, trampling the young trees in the dark and tearing up a fragile resource. But just uphill from the twisty but dead tree is a healthy sibling, germinated within 50 years of the poster tree and very much alive. But public carelessness doesn't mean we will wall off this experience. We work with people, we educate, we help them become trustworthy. There's a lineage of scientists, researchers, forest rangers, workers, and nature lovers of many kinds who were and are swept into the vortex of the oldest trees. I want to draw more people into our circle of tree love, into the lived experience of walking among these ancients, knowing a standing tree they are sharing breath with was here before the pyramids. That's the profound experience. Because when we find something that is bigger than us, we are transformed. So how have I been transformed? What have the bristlecones taught me? Something about persistence, how living with adversity can encourage longevity, how we too can maybe thrive on just enough rather than excess. I want to learn from these trees so savvy in survival, growing and changing so slowly. They let sections of themselves die away, yet continue to be supported by the structure. I want to learn to let go without giving up, still sending energy toward the new generation. It gives me trust in the continuity of life. My daily meditation has been to be like a tree, roots for stability, trunk strong and true, canopy productive and sheltering, drip line marking my boundaries. But I like to go beyond that in the template of the bristlecone, find my niche in the world, make changes steadily over time, let go of the parts of me that did not survive the aging and wising up process. Let time and experience groove me and sculpt me down to my essence. And may I pass this lived experience on toward the shadowed future. We can survive. Thank you.